This was the session for the AARP class last Saturday, and since we forgot to record, I'm just going to do a video to show you how we made these two variations of a Christmas card, all using basic shapes. So I went into my shapes button and first entered a square. If I resize it like this, it stays proportional with the width and height being exactly the same. But if I go up here on unlock, I can tell it what dimensions I want it to be. So for this, I'm going to go 4.25 by 10. And I'm going to change the color of this rectangle just by clicking up here. Under operations, there's a colored button. I'm going to make that white. So this is going to be the base for our card. And as you can see over here, I can either do it this way, and it's going to kind of open like a book, or I could rotate the whole thing so then it lifts up. We also need that fold line. So to get that, we're going to go back to shapes and grab the score line, make that the same height as the card, which is 4.25. Now we grab both of them by making a large window around both and say align to center. Once we have that centered, we want to click the attach button, which is this little paper clip down in the lower right. That's going to hold the placement and position of that score line. So now I can move this whole thing together and it's going to stay right where I want it. So next I want to make this little frame piece. Going back to shapes and doing another square, which I'll unlock. And we're going to make it half of this, which is 5 inches, by the height is 4.25. And I'm going to change that color to green. So you can see that fills the whole front of the card. But since I want to make a frame, I could have just figured out the math and entered the dimensions to make it slightly smaller. But here's a quick and easy way. Let's use the offset button. And you can see the offset does a little blue outline around the outside edge. Well, that's because we have this offset distance going to the outside. Let me just so you can see the preview change. But if I slide it to the inside, see how it's making that frame? So I'm going to type in minus to go to the inside, 0.25, and that is giving my inside um, frame piece. I'm also going to use the sharp cornered so I get nice crisp corners. I'm going to do apply. So now I'm going to do that again. Same exact sizing, apply. He's like, Shawn, why did you do that twice? Well, the first one gives me this outer dimension, and the second one gives me the inner dimension. So now I'm going to move these things down here. I can grab both of these and say slice. Slice is going to cut the little one that's inside out. See how I now created that frame? So now I'm going to change that color to green. So really all we need this first one for was to have the sizing quick and easy so that we could make everything else. Okay, so that means we can get rid of all of this. Now to make the tree. I'm going to do that from free shapes also. I'm going to insert a triangle. And then I'm going to right click on it and go duplicate to get another triangle. And I'm going to unlock this one so I can stretch it kind of wider. Play around with it, do whatever you want with it. It's all up to you. Other way to duplicate this triangle, besides just right clicking on it, is there's also a duplicate button up here. Or you could hit Control D on your keyboard. So I'm going to just make that. Okay, so now I have 3 triangles to kind of form my tree. I also need the little stump. So let's go back to shapes one more time and grab a square. And let's unlock that so we can make it a little rectangle. I'm not entering any hard dimensions. It's all just eyeballing it and making something you like. Okay. So now I want everything aligned through the center so that it's all from point to the middle of this is straight. So I'm going to grab everything and say align center horizontally. See how that moved everything so it's all perfectly straight. The last thing you're going to want to do is use the weld button. I am in the beta version right now, so it's actually under combine. If you are not in beta, it will just say weld here. But if you're in beta like me, you can click here and there's your weld. Weld will join everything and remove those cut lines in between. So now this is one piece. Now, I did make it bigger than it needs to be, but that's okay. Now I can just resize it like that. See? And let's change that color to the same green. So to get from this to this one that I did here, all I did was grab everything and say duplicate. And then I hold this down here and rotated the whole thing 90 degrees. And then I clicked on just the tree and rotated that one back. And I scooched it down a little bit. And then I grabbed a star from the free shapes. Resize that. That is still a really big star for this little tree. And I'm going to make the color of that yellow. That's it. Now you got 2 different variations of a Christmas tree card that you can make using free shapes. The next step is going to be to click Make It, and we are only going to make one version of this to save for time. But then we will score and cut all the pieces and assemble the card. So now we're going to click Make It, and you can see it says we're going to score and cut. Over here on the side says score first, then cut. Another little trick I want to show you is the way it's spaced out, the tree and the frame, it's trying to cut them separately. But to save on space, I can actually rotate this tree and slide it inside here. And now I will use less cardstock when I'm cutting. Okay, so then the next thing you're going to want to do, well, let's first go back to this sheet. Click continue. Now all the magic is going to happen on the Cricut. I am actually going to use a different color of cardstock than I used when we did the one in class, just because I didn't have that much of the paper. Here is the original one that we did. So now I'm starting off with my Cricut cutting mat, and I am going to put the sheet of paper that's going to be the base of my card down on the Cricut cutting mat first. When I load this into my Cricut, I want to make sure that it catches underneath the little lips of those side guides. And then I hold on to the back of my Cricut mat while I press that load double arrow so that it really fully loads it. Okay, next off, we want to make sure we have the scoring stylus in. So just remove the blade. You just flip that little gray lever and then that releases things so you can pull the blade housing out. And now I'm going to insert the scoring stylus. It basically looks like a pen that doesn't produce any ink. And this is great for making your score lines on cards and any paper crafts. Okay, so now we can hit the C button and it's going to go and score the paper. If you have one of the machines that have two housings right here, then the B housing is for your blades, B for blade, and your A housing is for your accessories, like the scoring stylus. I just have one holder, so that's why I have to switch mine back and forth. If we look at the Cricut, you can see that the letter C button is blinking. That's because it's waiting for us to do the next step. If it wanted us to unload the mat, it would have blinked the double arrow. But because it wants us to do the next step on the same material, that C button is blinking and waiting for me to switch from the scoring stylus to the cutting blade so that it can now do the cutting portion. You'll notice that my Cricut is actually going around the same lines twice. I was having some issues with my Cricut not cutting all the way through on some materials. So I went into my default settings and changed the setting for Cardstock Plus to actually go over it multiple times. It's a nice little thing that you can do to adjust your own settings. Now the double arrow is going to blink, so that means time to unload. Here's a little tip. Take the whole thing and flip it over and then roll back your cutting mat. This helps your cardstock to come out and come off the mat and not curl up. I used to take my spatula and kind of lift the cardstock off and it would get curled. Okay, now what I'm trying to show is that there's a score line, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get the close up to work. So I'm just going to fold on that score line. You can just fold it by hand, perfectly acceptable, but I have what's called a bone folder. And I just go over the whole thing with my bone folder and just score it a little harder, crisper of a line. You can use an old credit card for this. Works just fine. Right? So there's the base of our card. Now it's time to cut that frame and the tree. I like to use a double-sided paper for this because that way when it cuts, I can use one pattern for the frame and the other pattern for the tree, just like I did here. This was a double-sided paper and I used one for the frame and one for the tree. I could have flipped it and done the colors the other way. Gives me more options is basically why I like the double-sided paper when I'm doing this. Also, if I wanted to cut a lot of these, I could switch back and forth between using one color for the frame and one for the tree, and then all the cards don't look the same. All right, so now we are cutting the frame and the tree piece. I'm getting my glue all ready so that we can put everything together once it's cut. And when it's done cutting, that double arrow is going to blink, telling me time to hit that and unload it. Again, flip the mat so that you can peel it back. It's really great when you're doing larger pieces to kind of do that peel it away, roll it back with the mat so that you don't end up with curled edges. And I could use the little spatula tool to kind of help it along, but it was out of reach and I didn't want to pause the video. Okay, so now you can see my tree and my frame pieces, and I am going to adjust my camera angles slightly so you see more of my table for assembly because we're done cutting now. It's time to just put these pieces together. So here's the card base. I'm going to first take the frame piece, which seems to not want to lift up from my table. If I can just slide it, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to put the purple up for the frame like that. So I want to apply glue to the back. I like to use a Zig glue stick or glue pen. I love it. You squeeze right here, and then the glue is going to come out the tip of the pen. So it's just like writing. I can just draw a line. So when I'm doing something very fine and thin, like this frame, I can put glue exactly where I want it, and you don't end up with glue all over your fingers because you're just drawing a little line. And I'm going to hold this up to the camera, and hopefully you can see the glue. There you go. You can see the fine line of glue going over there. So you can see that it really does do a really thin, fine line. Just place that on top of the base of the card. There we go. Perfect little frame. Time to add the tree. I could do the tree with the purple, but I'm going to flip it and do the white. And I kind of like how those dots kind of almost look like the starts of ornaments on the tree. Very cute. You might have noticed I'm not using kind of like traditional colors of cardstock. Oh, sorry. Let me tell you about this. This is my tape runner, double sticky tape. You just run it down like that. Easy peasy. And now you can stick that in place. All right. That's all you need. So anyway, I was saying I like to use some non-traditional colors in my cards just because otherwise your Christmas cards all end up red and green and that gets boring and you can only buy so many different patterns of red and green paper before you're sick of it. So explore other color options. I did end up putting a little star on the top of my card just because I thought it needed something extra. I make a lot of cards for my nieces and nephews, and when I have scraps of paper, I will just cut some random stars out of there and put them in a little container and save them because any card, I feel like you can throw an extra star, put happy birthday on it, throw some stars on it, boom, you're done. So having stars handy is nice. And then the card can stand up like that. Oh, here's another thing. This scrap that we had left over from cutting it, you could actually use that to make a gift tag, or you could, let's pretend this was a blank card. You could add that to another card, and now you've used your scraps to make another card. Just add a little frame around that. You could even fill inside the tree with little dots or sequins to decorate your tree. Options are endless, but that way you can use up those other pieces.